right, hello everybody. Welcome to another slides review for your reference for our next topic, which focuses on the issues of development. All right, and this is from the first part of Unit 7. We'll get to the second part of Unit 7 later in the year. So today we're going to focus on the theories of development, mostly spending time with Rostow and Wallerstein, which you have read about up to this point, but this will be hopefully a pretty good review for you. So when we use the term development, the best thing you can do is to just think about what it means to develop in a normal context. So, I mean, if you really think about it and look at the two definitions offered, the words that I want to have you focus on are the words mature, advance, experience, possess. It's the same thing on a country level. When we're talking about the way that a country can develop, it's what do they begin to possess, what they, in ways that they didn't have things before. How are their economies or their technologies becoming more advanced? Their systems are more elaborate, whether that's trade, even education can become more elaborate in developed countries. So, really just think about the ways that things that aren't countries develop, whether that's people, a child into an adult. It could be in a relationship, right? From initial interest to, falling in love to getting married. The way that it changes over time and grows and becomes more complicated is the same idea for these countries. So this map, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it, but this will be a good reference for you to be able to come back to. And you can see in the North America over here, Europe, Japan, and then in the South Pacific, New Zealand is also part of this, but it's sort of cut out by the formatting of the slides. Those are what are really considered the developed regions of the world. Now, within the developing regions, you'll find some outliers like South Korea over here is a developed country. A highly developed economy, but it's part of a greater region that is more developing. So I would definitely write down and copy down this chart into your notes if you have that in front of you here, because I think it's a good visual for you to see Rostow's ideas. All right, his is a very what's called like linear concept. Right, how every country in his theory starts at stage 1 and possesses the ability to move up to stage 5. And in his theorizing of this, he had the belief that every country wants to move up to stage 5, and that's ultimately their end goal. His beliefs come out of studying this going back, he was alive and doing this in the 1950s, and he based this theory on the United States and Europe, which, if you think about the map on the last slide, it sort of makes sense. If the idea is you're shooting for high mass consumption, and the US and Europe was already there, why not trace and understand the steps that it took them to get there? But we'll talk more about some of the critiques of using that as your basis of understanding. This is really centered on the capitalism model. All right, that countries are going to engage in capitalism, and if they follow it to its fullest extent, like the United States, this is where they could end up. Some of these other things where you see the word dependent, that'll become, I think, into more clarity as we get into some of the next couple slides. This same thing I'm not really going to talk over, but it's just going to give you an example of how the United States developed according to Rostow, all right, and what part of the U.S. history they are in each stage. And then I've also, for a point of comparison, put for today what countries are in those stages currently. Now, one thing that happens with Rostow, and this connects back to one of the readings that you did, is as the stages change, so do the types of jobs that people have within their country. So if you look at the traditional societies, right, most people are working in the primary sector jobs, which we know primary sector is, direct contact with the earth, extracting materials, raw materials, whether it's in agriculture or mineral production or anything like that. And on the opposite end, you're going to have very few people in the tertiary sector, which those are providing goods and services. So if you look at the last point of text on this slide, law, finance, services, education, marketing, investment, any of those types of things, those are all tertiary activities. Now, as a country becomes more developed, what happens, and a good way to understand it, is more professional type jobs come into being, right? You'll see that, most people, I'm going to go back to the Rostow stages for a second. Most people you see where stage 5 is consumer oriented. A lot of that has to do with people having the money to purchase goods, right? If it's consumer oriented, you need lots of consumers. So it's the jobs in the tertiary sector, okay, that allow people to act as consumers. Right? People are working less, and they're gaining more money at the same time. Okay? And even, for their jobs, they might be purchasing goods. Whereas in the primary sector, you have very few consumers, because also in the primary sector, you have people who are relying on self-subsistence. So if you're a farmer in a less developed, low-stage country, much of what you're farming is probably going to you and your family. Whereas somebody in agriculture in the United States is more likely producing that for mass consumption, right? A farmer in California or Iowa or Florida is sending goods around the country. So there are some issues that people have with Rostow's theory, critiques. The first is that it overlooks non-Western cultures. Some non-Western cultures need to don't emphasize or don't focus on capitalism and economics in the same way. It's a more holistic approach, and so this doesn't allow for that. And as I just kind of mentioned, if an economic system is not capitalist, if it's a communist economy, or if it's a socialist economy, that doesn't come into effect here. So this only looks at how countries with capitalist economies can grow and develop. This we're going to get into a lot with the next theory, but it sort of devalues the importance of globalization and how countries have established relationships and how that could affect one or the other. It doesn't consider physical barriers to development. Some countries are more isolated because they're either landlocked, they have a harsh geography, they could be mountainous. It doesn't allow for some of the same growth that, say, the United States has with its, varied geographical features. And then it also doesn't get into the fact that stage 5 countries really got there through a result of exploiting the developed countries through colonization and imperialism. That has all helped get them to that place, but it doesn't give them the sort of it doesn't give us an understanding of that, and which makes us wonder, well, if you're not one of those stage 5 countries already, is it possible to reach that point if there's no one left to exploit? We're going to move on to the next type of theory, which is a dependency theory. And I think the best way you can consider this is think about what it is to be dependent upon something or someone. That requires support. Okay, so as I have pictured here, think of a child and a parent, right? There's a dependency, especially, for the age of the child that we have pictured. That kid needs the parent for everything, for preparing food, for providing it medicine when it's sick, for taking the child places. There's a high degree of dependency. And while countries don't necessarily have a parent-child relationship, there is a lot of intertwined networks that exist in the world that affect countries' levels of development. So Emanuel Wallerstein, pictured here, also playing the role of a high school biology teacher, looked at the fact that countries don't act in isolation. And that's what I was just talking about. No country can really develop by itself because countries require receiving goods from other places, and they also want to send their products to other places. And so again, this goes to the point that all countries are dependent upon others. And his system is different than Rostow's because his is based on both economic and political factors. That the way that countries have political relationships help define whether they're developed or developing. And bear in mind, with both of these theories, these are just that, they're theories, so they're not hard and fast rules. That's why we see the criticisms. They can be sort of debated and hashed over what is the correct way. These are two different images that represent Wallerstein's model. I put both of them up because one of them might catch your eye or help you remember better than the other. All you have to really do is just follow the colors. So you can see with the one on the left, the beige color, the core is in the middle. All they're doing is sending goods out to the semi-periphery and the peripheral countries. Whereas the peripheral country and the semi-periphery are sending resources to the core. The one on the right provides a little different look as far as the semi-periphery is in blue, supplying both the core and the periphery, whereas the semi-periphery is also receiving from both ends as well. So again, very simple. It's just a way to visualize the content we're about to discuss. Again, a quick reference for you to be able to look at countries by type. All right, the blue countries are the core, the purple semi-periphery, and the red is the periphery countries. And it breaks down very similarly to Rostow's model, just the fact that when you add the purple, it creates a little more of differences around the globe. So what are some characteristics of these core countries? They are the center of world businesses, so most multinational corporations hail from core countries. They are the center of high skill production, right? Even if that's not the actual production of the iPhone itself, but the creation of the iPhone is an American vision, an American product. In these countries, they promote social accumulation. Okay, and that's you talk about the goals for a lot of people is achieving the American dream, which in a lot of ways is economic security and safety, and having maybe not high degrees of wealth, but feeling very comfortable and being able to buy things and consume things. And the core countries operated on the premise of neocolonialism, so being like new colonism, right? And this even considers up to today. This isn't just exploration and imperialism, this is in more modern times as well. And this is one way where Wallerstein differs from Rostow, because he is considering this idea. And that's just a definition for you of neocolonialism. That's what the political cartoon on the left is trying to show as well, that you've sort of dug into Africa for all of these resources, and you can see that they've gone to the developed areas of the world. The next topic is the semi-periphery characteristics. So these countries are your more middle-income countries, so not in the highest rates of poverty, but not exceptionally wealthy like some of the core countries. Another term you might hear them called is emerging economies. The little mnemonic device to help you remember this is there's 5 countries, the BRICS countries, which we'll discuss more in class, but it's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. They are considered these emerging economies. They do provide manufactured goods to the core. So if you think about many of the things that you own that say made in China, that's one example. And other things that they might have are like call centers. This is one area where India has really become a hub of business, being call centers for American companies or British companies, because of a tradition of having learned English under their colonialism of the British Empire. The picture with the dog was just the idea of they're on the outside. Oops, sorry, on the outside looking in. So almost into that core, enough to see what's going on and get a sense of it, but not quite in the club just yet. And then finally, the characteristics for periphery countries. You have low skill, labor intensive jobs. This is where you're extracting raw materials. Okay, this very similar to like a stage 1 and stage 2 country with Rostow. If we're going to compare the two, this is a similarity. You've probably heard the term blood diamonds. They made a movie about it with Leonardo DiCaprio there. But a blood diamond is the idea that companies have really exploited workers, particularly in Africa, in mining those diamonds. And then, of course, when the diamonds are harvested and then, carved and turned into, jewelry, where do they get sold? They get sold in developed countries, right? And then those companies that are selling those diamonds are also housed in developed countries. So the blood is shed in the diamond mines, which are in, say Africa, but the wealth and the resources then end up in the developed countries. And there's a tradition of supplying a lot of materials or labor. So companies that go offshore for their some of their factory production or other parts of their businesses that they can send overseas, they'll do that. And these are the places that they'll go because there's an opportunity to create a lot of jobs. You have high populations in a lot of these places. And there's also a lot of weak laws for workers and the environment. So maybe some environmental restrictions that would hurt your ability to produce your product in, say, the United States. It might be a lot easier to do in China. Or workers' laws about minimum wages or hours that somebody can work are drastically different in these developing economies than they are in the United States. Critiques of Wallerstein. I'm just going to sort of leave these up here for you because I think they're pretty straightforward. And I'll allow you the chance to review those. I will explain the non-governmental organizations as basically these are groups or charities that aid development. They could be based off of the United Nations or something like oh man, I'm totally blanking right now. Wow, that's not good. Doctors Without Borders, excuse me. That's a really good example of an NGO. It's people who have come together to work around the globe to provide healthcare and aid to people who need it. And it's not really supported, say, by the government. It's not up to government law or policy. And finally, this is something we'll get into, I think, more, well, I know more as the year goes on, but I just want to introduce it to you here. A commodity is an economic good or service. So it's something that has value. And developing countries rely on only a few of these, whereas developed countries have an advantage because they're very diversified. And the way that we can understand this is looking at the United States. The United States has a huge agricultural sector, but we also have industrial production. We also have a great deal of professional services. We even have entertainment services and tourism and all types of things that create a lot of opportunity and a lot of ways to earn money. Other countries face a more dangerous position because they rely on only a handful of products or goods or services. So, for example, if your country relies heavily on agriculture and is not really developed beyond that, if a drought comes or as climate change has more of an effect, then all of a sudden there's going to be less opportunity for people or less money coming in to the country. Even with the production of goods, it's really on the whims of the developed countries. If interests changed where the products are being bought, if all of a sudden people stop buying Nikes or iPhones, then that's going to really affect jobs and income levels in these developing countries. So to not be able to sort of diversify what commodities bring you money can be very difficult for these countries. This is one reason why India fits nicely as one of those BRICS countries, because they have begun to grow and diversify, with agriculture still being important, factory production still being important, professional services, like not just call centers, but even United States accountants can send out somebody's tax records to a person in India, and they're able to just learn the laws of the United States tax codes, do the math, and then send it back to the accountant. So there's all different ways that they have grown and developed, and that's sort of helping India become one of the closer to being a core country. So that's all we have for this set. I apologize for my voice because my allergies have been bugging me the last couple of days, so my throat has been really bothering me. But hey, you got to push through and do what you got to do for the students, right? So this is it for the theories of development, and I will see you guys in class.